Juliane Kopka, born year 1954 on the 10th of October in Lima, Peru, a child of two scientists who planted their lives deep in the Amazon. Her father, Hans Wilhelm, and her mother Maria were zoologists, who founded Panguana, a remote biological research station, where Juliane learned to read the rainforest like a book. She grew up barefoot under a green canopy, taught to identify birds by song, to respect the rules of water and weather, and to move silent and careful through a world that was both fragile and fierce. This is the story of how those lessons, learned in a place most people never see, saved a life that should have been lost. The date is Christmas Eve, year 1971. Juliane is 17, freshly graduated from high school on the 23rd of December, and boarding Lanza Flight 508 with her mother for the short flight from Lima toward Pucallpa. The family had planned to be together in Panguana for the holidays. But Juliane, proud of her diploma and stubborn in the small private way of youth, insisted on finishing school in Lima. Now she sits in a window seat near the rear of a Lockheed L-188 Electra turboprop. The cabin is filled with other travelers, and the small ritual of mid-morning sandwiches. Outside, the wide Peruvian sky is changing. A storm gathers. What happens next will turn a routine flight into the most improbable survival tale of the century. The Electra climbs. For a while, everything is ordinary. Then, dark clouds pull together over the Amazon basin. Turbulence begins. Passengers clutch armrests. Packages rattle. Juliane remembers flashes of light, the kind her mother once taught her to fear above the treetops. And then a roar. The plane shudders in a violence that feels like the air itself breaking. A bolt of lightning slams into the right wing. Something in the aircraft gives way. In an instant, the Lockheed Electra begins to disintegrate. Juliane later recalled the sound as a ripping, elemental tearing of metal and canvas. Beside her, her mother supposedly whispered, with a calm that would be remembered forever, "Now it is all over." What makes Juliane's story so improbable is a single, almost miraculous detail. She did not fall alone. The lightning and structural failure tore the aircraft apart. Juliane was swept out of the fuselage, but she remained strapped to her row of seats. For thousands of meters, the seats and their occupants plunged together through a thunder-wide sky. From roughly 3,000 meters, about 10,000 feet, she plummeted through rain and wind into the green ceiling of the Amazon. The canopy, dense and layered, broke her fall. The treetops caught and crumpled. Branches and leaves slowed the descent. When Juliane finally hit the jungle floor, it was Christmas Day, the 25th of December, year 1971. She was alive. She was a 17-year-old girl with a concussion, a broken collarbone, deep cuts and bruises, and a world of jungle opened around her. When she regained consciousness, Juliane was alone. The crash had killed most of the 92 people on board. Other survivors existed in the wreckage at first, but would not all live to be found. Miraculously, 14 people initially survived the impact, in different parts of the forest. But the remote location, the storm, and the terrifying environment meant they died before rescue could reach them. Juliane's mother, Maria, did not survive. Her body was recovered later. Juliane, however, had one advantage no one else could claim: a childhood spent in the Amazon, learning how the jungle works, how water leads to people, how small, careful actions can keep you alive. From the first moment, Juliane applied the rules her parents had taught her. She examined her wounds, tested her limbs, located a small stream. She knew, instinctively, that water is the jungle's highway, that following a creek downstream is the best route to human habitations. She knew which plants to avoid. She rationed the sweets and chocolate she found in her pockets and the wreckage, dividing small pieces into measured meals. To hold her body steady, she walked, she rested, she moved again. She avoided unknown fruits and roots. She kept as dry as possible without fire. She kept calm. For 11 days, she lived with the constant small arithmetic of survival. Pace your steps. Preserve energy. Treat wounds. Follow the water. Juliane's injuries became tests of will and improvisation. A laceration she carried became infected and attracted maggots. At first, the wound festered, a hazard that could quickly become fatal in the wet, bacteria-rich forest. But Juliane remembered something her father once used. Petrol disinfects and drives out maggots. She found a hut used by local loggers. A crude shelter. Inside, she discovered a can of gasoline. With the detached, clinical instinct of someone who had watched field procedures all her life, she poured gasoline over the wound. She removed the maggots. She applied a makeshift bandage. It was brutal. It was dangerous. But it saved her from septic shock. A resourceful child of science. Acting completely alone, she moved mostly at dawn and dusk, following small streams into larger rivers. She swam part of the way to avoid piranha-filled shallows, recalling a father's lecture and a mother's stories. At times, she was terrified of snakes, of the night, of being unseen beneath the canopy. While planes searched from above, she heard engines. She heard planes. But she knew the dense green would hide her from air searches. She ate sparingly. She slept curled against roots and under broad leaves, making shelters from what she could gather. The jungle ate at her body with rain and sun, but it also gave her ears for rain patterns, a nose for shelter, and an instinct for the narrow trail that leads to people. On the 11th day after the crash, weak, wounded, and sunburned, Juliane reached a riverbank and encountered the hand that pulled her back to society. Peruvian fishermen, returning to their camp. To them, she was an apparition, a pale, emaciated blonde figure who floated into view, as if a spirit from folklore. Local stories spoke of water spirits or mermaids. The fisherman's first reaction was fright. Then the reality set in. This was a human, alive, injured, speaking fluent Spanish. They carried her to their canoe and ferried her downstream, the very direction she had been following, to the village where authorities could be notified. On the 4th of January, year 1972, 11 days after the crash, Juliane was airlifted to a hospital in Pucallpa and reunited with her father. The world that had once seemed vast and indifferent suddenly reached for her. The aftermath of survival is its own landscape. Juliane recovered physically, and then mentally. She helped authorities locate victims and the crash site. She identified the remains of her mother on the 12th of January. But the public story shifted too, from sensational survival to wider questions. Why had Lanza flown into that storm? Why had regulations failed? Why had an aging aircraft, assembled from spare parts, been allowed to carry passengers into dangerous weather? What happened next in Juliane's life is a quiet testament to continuity, not spectacle. She returned to study. She returned to science. In year 1980, she graduated in biology, later earned a doctorate in zoology, specializing in mammalogy. She studied bats. She published research in the very rainforest that nearly killed her. In year 1989, she married Eric Diller, a German entomologist. In year 2000, she took over the Panguana Research Station. She later worked as a librarian at the Bavarian State Collection of Zoology in Munich. And in year 2011, she published her memoir, When I Fell from the Sky: How the Jungle Gave Me Back My Life. Juliane Kepke's survival is told again and again, because it carries a rare clarity. A life shaped by knowledge. Save that life when all else failed. People speak of miracles. And yes, there is a miraculous geometry to falling 10,000 feet and surviving. But miracle is only part of the story. The rest is training, teaching, habit, and presence. The difference between one who survives and one who does not is often measured in ordinary acts: rationing a piece of chocolate, following a tiny creek, remembering a father's precaution about piranhas, using a petrol can to disinfect a wound. The science of survival, practiced as a domestic routine in Panguana, became the string that pulled Juliane back from the brink. Her story has also become a mirror. It asks, what do we do when systems designed to protect us fail? The investigation into the Lanza crash highlighted regulatory gaps and corporate negligence. It raised questions about airline safety and accountability that still echo in debates about transportation and oversight. Juliane's survival fascinated filmmakers and writers. Werner Herzog famously made Wings of Hope in year 1998. Her memoir and many articles have treated the incident as both thriller and moral lesson. But beyond film and headlines, Juliane's life is the continuation of a scientist's vocation and a conservationist's commitment. She chose to study the animals she loved, to run the station her parents created, and to tend the fragile world that had both nearly taken her and ultimately kept her alive. As a closing note, when history collects its dramatic moments, we often reduce them to a single image: the fall, the hospital bed, the faded photograph of a teenage girl who fell from the sky. But the full story is longer, stranger, more instructive. It is the story of a family who lived among the very things that would later determine survival, of an airline whose choices had consequences, of a girl who remembered the names of plants and birds, the way others remember phone numbers, of the fisherman whose courage and kindness anchored the final chapter. Juliane Koepke's life asks us to reconsider how knowledge, environment, and small acts of preparation can tip the balance between death and survival. So you watched it complete. Your every friend must know this story, so share it as much as possible. Thank you for watching this documentary about Juliane Koepke, survivor, scientist, and keeper of a rainforest legacy. If her story moved you, tell someone, not to marvel at misfortune, but to remember the everyday lessons of preparation and humility. Teach the young the rules of their world, respect the forces that surround us, and lend help when one of us falls.